Announcement. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the WellMed Charitable Foundation Caregiver Teleconnection. We are so pleased to have Dr. Barry Jacobs with us today for many reasons, but most of all because he's a great presenter and a very smart person in terms of caregiving issues. So, Barry, with that little introduction, please tell people who you are and start your presentation.
Thank you so much, Evelyn. I hope I know some about caregiving. I'm smart about other things. Maybe it's not so much, but my wife could tell you better. Um, so welcome all, and thank you for joining today. It's the topic is overcoming caregiver self-doubts, and it's certainly a subject that I know both professionally and personally, dealing with my own self-doubts during the time that I was a caregiver. Um, so I'll tell you a little bit about myself and what we're going to do today together. And then, as Evelyn said, it would be wonderful if we had lots of participation because first of all, it's more fun, and secondly, we learn from one another, and thirdly, because it just makes me less insecure. So, and that's what this is about. It's all helping me feel fewer self-doubts and helping you feel fewer self-doubts. So, I'm a clinical psychologist in Pennsylvania, and I have been focusing on family caregivers for over 30 years. I grew up in a family where my dad had brain cancer when I was a teenager, and that had enormous impact on me personally and also in terms of my career choice. And then I also was a caregiver for 7 years for my mother who had vascular dementia and my stepfather who had Alzheimer's dementia. They're both now deceased. But as much as I've learned professionally and from caregiving clients, I learned an enormous amount from my own personal experience caring for my mother and stepfather, and I certainly dealt with a lot of self-doubts during those experiences. So, let me tell you what I have in mind for today. So we're going to talk a little bit about not just the bad of having self-doubts, but maybe some of the good that comes along with having self-doubts, as well as why would caregivers doubt themselves. Um, and then we're going to talk about ways of overcoming self-doubts. And I have kind of three separate ideas here. We'll talk about one after the other. The first is separating the past from the present. The second is analyzing thoughts along the lines of what we do in what's called cognitive behavior therapy. And then the third is dealing with others' criticism, because self-doubts comes sometimes, self-doubts is a lot about the criticism we level at ourselves. But that criticism we level at ourselves is oftentimes prompted by criticism that others direct at us. And so figuring out a way to deal with others' criticism is very, very important in life and in caregiving. And then finally, talk a little bit about how if we can overcome our self-doubts, then what we can move towards is optimism and feeling like we're growing and learning. So I hope that's what everybody has in mind for today. And let me say again, I have lots of places in here for us to talk together, and I'm really gonna be looking to you to share some of your thoughts and feelings because we all learn more from that. So uh, I have a month. I've written a couple of self-care books for family caregivers, and I also write a column on the AARP website for family caregivers. I've been doing that since 2013. And then when I went back and looked at some of my old articles, I've written about this many times, this topic of dealing with self-doubts or finding ways of increasing your confidence. So here are the links to four of the articles I've written in the past. I promise you they're not the same article, just with same wine in different bottle. They're actually make different points. But when you receive this PowerPoint after the presentation, you can take a look at these articles if you want to learn more. So let's start off with just some basic questions. What is self-doubt? have you ever had self-doubts about your capabilities as a caregiver? And if you have had self-doubts, would you be willing to share some of the self-doubts that you've had? So you can unmute yourself. You can put something in the chat. Um, but love to hear. I mean, just even if you haven't had your own self-doubts, what is self-doubt? What are we talking about there?
And also, folks, if you're on the phone, you can press *6. And I have a little website. I can see that you've done that. And I can call on you by your prefix or your area code. So let's hear it.
And I tell you, the longer the silence goes on, the more self-doubts I have.
Well, you know what, Mary? I'm just going to say, don't we all have self doubts every day about something or other, about how we handled it? Or
Well, I would think so, but let's get our definition. So, Eva,
okay,
what would you say the meaning of self-doubt is? What is self-doubt?
are you asking me?
I'm asking you because
Okay. Well, so I make a decision and I go, was that the right decision? Or I make a phone call and I end it in a way that I keep thinking, was that the right thing to say? It's 20 times a day.
okay, so it's like having second thoughts.
Mhm.
Sometimes they call it Monday morning quarterbacking, right? You think back to what you just did. You think, did I do that right? Did I say that right? Did I say the right thing? Um, I think I agree. Laura writes, I feel like it's never enough. And Laura, I am wondering if you could tell us more what you mean by I feel like it's never enough. And if you'd be willing to unmute and say that, I would be eternally grateful. Or while Laura's getting unmuted, if anybody else has thoughts that they'd like to share. So here's my question to you, Laura. You say, I feel like it's never enough. So what is the it's? Are you saying that you feel like you're never enough? You feel like your caregiving is never enough? You feel like, um, maybe something else is it? Helping my mother do everything. Okay. So I'm kind of reading between the lines here, literally reading between the lines, and I'm going to say maybe helping my mother do everything means that you feel like somehow it's never enough. You never can do everything. Everything is a big, big word. It encompasses lots of things. But maybe it's very hard to do everything. But when you do everything, it's still not enough. Uh, Hopefully, I'm getting that right. Even though she can probably do more for herself. Okay, so you're doing lots and lots and lots for your mother, and then you're thinking that you are not doing enough for her, and then you're adding, even though your mother can probably do more for herself. Um, and it says she's having problems with her pipes. I'm the only one to help. Okay. Um, she's not hard on my sisters, just me. Okay. All right. Well, we're getting into a little bit different topic here, Laura, which is about why sometimes in many families, the research suggests it's usually either the oldest daughter or the youngest daughter who gets chosen by the mother to be the caregiver for them. And maybe you're the oldest daughter or the youngest daughter. But in any event, it sounds like your mother is more demanding of you than she is of your sisters. And that can certainly cause more self-doubts. Or as Barbara has put in here, a lot of second guessing. As much as you do, somehow it's not enough. Um, yes, I am the oldest by 5 minutes. I am a twin. Well, I'm sure that you've been telling people for your whole life that you're the oldest, and you don't have to add the 5 minutes. You could just say you're the oldest. Um, so, but yes, I mean it's often the oldest or youngest daughter, not son, but daughter who's expected to do this work, and that person often has more expectations placed upon them. And in terms of the second question here on the screen, have you ever had self-doubts about your capabilities? What I'm hearing is that maybe Laura has, maybe Barbara has. I'm wondering about other folks. And that one self-doubt that Laura has had is that no matter what she does, it's never enough. That she always feels like somehow she's expected to do more, or she should do more. Um, does anybody else have self-doubts they want to share?
I think I'm willing.
Go ahead, Patricia or Patty. What do you prefer to be called?
Good morning. Whatever rolls off, that's fine. Um, Making logical decisions in the light of day, uh, the best decisions for right now, and then waking up the next day thinking, "Oh, did I did I satisfy everything that needed to be done? Is there more? Did I miss anything in making that decision?"
That's what I think Barbara calls second guessing, or,
Definitely.
what I call Monday morning
Mhm.
quarterbacking. You did your,
Yes.
Sunday, you
Due
sat
diligence.
down and in the light of day with everything in front of you, you made your best decision. And the next day it
Yes.
said, well, was that really the best decision?
Did I miss something?
Okay. That's that's a great example of self-doubts. And I think, as Evelyn said, many of us, maybe all of us, experience that to some degree. Thank you, Patricia. And anybody else have any thoughts before we go on?
Love to hear from you guys.
Yeah.
Ladies.
Okay. We will go on, and then there are more questions to come. You'll have other opportunities, I promise you. So, all right. Whoops. So I think we've pretty much defined self-doubt. Let me just kind of add some other words in here. And sometimes we could, we call self-doubt insecurity, that we've made a decision, but we're not quite sure of that decision, that we doubt ourselves, that maybe we made the best decision, or maybe we think that someone else would make a better decision, or we think that someone else is more capable of doing the work that we're now doing. So we just within the idea of self-doubting is really kind of putting oneself down a little bit, that somehow we don't measure up, we don't perform as well as somebody else might. But that doesn't mean that self-doubt is necessarily all bad. So as we can see here on the screen, um, when people become caregivers, for the most of the time, not always, but most of the time, they're dealing with things they've never dealt with before.
Yeah.
They may be dealing with caring for somebody that they've never cared for before, or maybe they've never spent so much time caring for an adult like this. They may be dealing with someone who has an illness that they've never encountered before, or they're dealing with doctors and treatments they've never dealt with before. There's a lot in the beginning of caregiving that's mostly new for folks. And so to have some doubt is a normal response to the new challenges and to the uncertainty. Because the other thing about caregiving is we're not quite sure how this is going to go. We're not quite sure how our parent or our spouse are going to do with whatever condition they have. And so there's a lot of question marks as to what's going to happen. And most of the time when people are uncertain about the future, then they're more prone to self-doubts. So what's good about this? Well, when we have self-doubts, it tends to slow us down. We're not going to rush to judgment about something. If anything, we're gonna take our time more, because whatever decision we make, whatever we do, we want to be as sure about it as we possibly can. So what we're going to do is proceed cautiously and with humility. We're not going to suddenly decide, oh, well, I know everything, and I've never been a caregiver before, but how hard can this be? And I'm just going to do this and everything be great. Instead, self-doubt slows us down, so we proceed more cautiously. And because everything is slowed down a little bit, that then creates more time for us to learn how to actually face the challenges we're now facing. It puts a longer time frame in there for us to gain the skills and knowledge we need to be the best caregivers we can be. And actually may be the impetus for us to do the learning. We don't assume that we know things or that we're capable of things. We have to learn the skills. We have to practice them to get good at them. So that's a good of self-doubt. But the bad, I think, is probably what we're more familiar with when we have not just self-doubts, but nagging self-doubts. So what do I mean by nagging self-doubts? This is when it's not just you wake up the next day and you reconsider what you thought the day before, and maybe you say, I should have made a different decision, and then you go on. But it's more like you wake up every day thinking, do I know what I'm doing? Am I capable of doing this? Am I messing things up? Am I going to make things worse? Those nagging self-doubts, the ones that just kind of circulate through your brain, maybe not 100% of the time, but enough of the time to really bother you. Those self-doubts then can make caregivers very tentative, meaning they don't want to make a decision because they're afraid that every decision they're going to make is wrong. And if they make wrong decisions, then somehow it means that there's something wrong with them. And so they avoid making decisions, sometimes decisions that they should make because they're afraid of being wrong. And then as a result, they may not be as effective as caregivers as they should be, because to be effective, caregivers have to make decisions. And the other thing that's bad about self-doubts, about people, caregivers who become very tentative is, as the line goes, no one wants to ride with a jittery driver, right? If you're in a car with someone and they're behind the wheel and they're terrified of being on the highway, well, you're ready to jump out of the car. You don't want to be with them. And that's true with caregivers and care receivers. If the caregiver has so many self-doubts that they seem nervous all the time, well, care receivers pick up on that, and it makes them more nervous too. And so do other family members. They all become more nervous, as if maybe this person really doesn't know how to drive. Maybe this person really can't do the job. And that doesn't make caregivers feel more confident in their abilities when suddenly the people around them are beginning to doubt them. But if caregivers doubt themselves, others are going to doubt them. If others doubt them, then that's going to reinforce the caregiver's self-doubts. It becomes kind of a vicious cycle. So before I go on, any thoughts about this? Anybody agree, disagree? I'm going to go down here and I'm going to look at some of the names here, and I'm going to start calling on people Socratically because I'm a really mean, awful guy. Actually, someone put something in the chat, so you're saved there for a moment. All right. Barbara says, agree. Thank you, Barbara. I appreciate that. Barbara, would you mind unmuting yourself and sharing more about what you agree with? I see you did put 2 exclamation points after agree, and I appreciate the exclamation points. Barbara says I don't have my audio connected. Barbara, you're now off the hook. I won't call on you Socratically again. But I'm looking here at the list. I'm looking at Patrice and Samantha and Julie and Morgan. Anybody want to take a gander at this? I see June. We've already heard from Laura. I see Christine. I see Rebecca. Anybody else have any thoughts about the good and the bad of self-doubt?
If I might, I would just say, I think when you talk about the bad, it's it governs your whole life, not just your caregiving life. Once you get into this mode of, is this right? Is this okay? I'm not sure about myself, that you lose self-confidence.
Absolutely. I mean, self-doubt is really the opposite of self-confidence. It's really feeling like maybe I don't have it. Maybe I'm just not the right person. Maybe I'm falling on my face here and I don't even feel it. So I agree with you, Evelyn. I've tried my best. I've begged, I've pleaded, I've cajoled. I've tried to be as charming as I can, and no one else is talking, and I'm going to go on to the next slide consequently. I can only beg, but so much. All right. So we can ask the question, why do caregivers doubt themselves? And I think we can come up with a bunch of possibilities. And here's some of the ones that I came up with. So as I think we all know from our own caregiving situations, this ain't easy, right? This is, we're dealing with new things. We're dealing with hard things. It's maybe hard to do the particular care task. It may be hard to go, to get somebody to the doctor and to sit in the doctor's office and to listen to what the doctor's saying and to try to understand what the doctor's saying and then to share that information with the rest of the family. That's not so easy. That can be very, very difficult. And so if you doubt yourself, particularly at the beginning, it makes sense because this is hard. And especially if you're not familiar with it, you may not have the perfect, all that confidence right away. I do see another comment in the chat, and I'm going to go down and take a look at it. And this is from Barbara, and she says, when I made decisions years ago regarding caring for my mother and friend, I saw myself as inadequate instead of what I did being inadequate. Wow, that's a really interesting distinction. Like I'm gonna come back to that in a second. So let me read that again. When I made decisions years ago regarding caring for my mother and friend, I saw myself as inadequate instead of seeing what I did being inadequate, like decisions on time. Feeling like I needed to be with my mom when I was with my kids and needing to be with my mom. And I'm assuming what you mean is feeling like you also need to be with your kids when you're with your mom, because that's pretty common. I know that feeling very well. But this idea that it's not only that you may have not been adequate with what you did, but somehow you were inadequate. And there's a word for that when people feel totally inadequate, and that's insecurity, that's lack of confidence, that's feeling like it's not only that I didn't do a good job, but there's something that I'm not capable of doing a good job. I doubt myself. I think that's a really, really good point, Barbara. I appreciate your sharing that. So back to, why do caregivers doubt themselves? So we talked about how maybe early on in caregiving, there's good reasons to, because this is hard. But when people have had past personal histories of failure, maybe they failed in their job, maybe they got fired, or maybe they failed at being a caregiver for another family member, or maybe they just have failed at other things in life. That doesn't give them the self-confidence as they approach this new role as a caregiver. Or maybe this person has had a personal history of trauma. Maybe they were abused by others, and that has undermined their confidence in themselves, that they're okay, that they can handle things. When people are overly self-critical, and there are lots and lots and lots of people in the world that I meet who are overly self-critical. People who are overly self-critical, and what I mean by that is they're harder on themselves than they need to be, and they're harder on themselves than is realistic. They criticize themselves for things they don't need to criticize themselves for, because they're more adequate than they give themselves credit for. But that being overly self-critical is the same thing as saying that they're going to have a lot of self-doubts. And then as I mentioned earlier, when caregivers have their own self-doubts, and then the care receiver, the person they're caring for, is critical of them, well, that just reinforces their self-doubts. They could be doing, let's say, they make dinner for mom. They made dinner for mom. Maybe they know they're not the best cook in the world. Maybe they're actually just learning how to cook, because they never had to do so much cooking before. And then mom says, I don't like this meal, I'm not eating it. But what does that do? It doesn't make the caregiver feel more confident that they can be a good cook and serve a nice meal. It's going to make them less confident. They're going to have even more self-doubts the next night when they may be trying a different recipe. So that was just kind of one small example. But when the care receiver is critical, it's tough on the caregiver. And then when other family members are critical, I always find that other family members, particularly the ones that are not on the front line doing the work, they're often very free with advice, right? They love to give advice. They say, why don't you do this? Why don't you do that? The quote unquote helpful suggestions, which really are not so helpful. But when people get all these helpful suggestions, they often feel caregivers receive all these helpful suggestions. They often don't feel supported. They often feel criticized. So all of these things may lead to self-doubts. Anybody else have any other ideas about what might lead to self-doubts or yeah, I mean, other reasons for self-doubts and then we'll get
Barry, I'd like to just add one big one that
Sure.
I have heard many times over my very long career, and that's the whole issue of, caregivers don't get any training. If they get discharged from the hospital, they get written discharge plans. There's medications that they're not familiar with. There's maybe medical services that they're delivering, like insulin, giving somebody insulin, or taking temperatures, or taking the A1C, or using medical equipment. And when you go home and all of a sudden you're responsible for this stuff, it's tough. And honestly, people don't know that they can ask for the kind of training that they might need. So they want to take it on, and they want to do a good job, and talk about a setup for self-doubt.
I think you're absolutely right. And caregivers are asked to do things without a lot of training all the time. But you also added something very important, which is that if we ask for training, whether it be from the healthcare professional or from, sometimes we have to manage equipment at home. The equipment manufacturer will provide training, or we may get it from the WellMed Charitable Foundation website, listening to past caregiver teleconnections, that there is training to be had. It's out there, and we have to reach out for it. But I absolutely agree with you. Any other reasons for self-doubts anybody can think of? Okay, so now the next question is really, I think, what most of us have come here for, and that is, so we figured out everyone's got self-doubts. We figured out there may be reasons for self-doubts. All right, now what do we do about them? So if anybody here has ever had self-doubts, how have you overcome them? What did you do?
Share your story, please. I want to hear from you.
I'm a psychologist. I can sit in a room and be silent for hours. It's just, amazing.
I got my microphone working. Can you hear me?
Excellent,
Yay,
Barbara.
Barbara.
Okay, I'm sorry about that. When I took care of my mom, I'm older now, but when I was younger, I've taken care of my mother and taken care of other relatives and other friends. But I had to change how I would talk to myself internally. I could be a travel agency on guilt trips for myself, but not for other people.
That's a great line. I'm going to steal that line, Barbara.
That's fine. You're welcome to it. But I found that my self-talk, I would never talk to anyone else the way I would talk to myself. And I was a nurse for 32 years, and then later on became a psychotherapist. But it's like, we're still, really bad on this. So as far as self-care, but I used to rant on myself, and my mother was very ill, had a stroke, was paralyzed down, and I had to drive 50 miles a day when my kids were at school, and I felt like I was not enough for them. But I would talk to myself like, well, you need to do more, you should do this. And I had this ideal situation of a caregiver, and especially being a nurse, you have these type, well, you're a nurse, you ought to know how to do this stuff, and you ought to be able to balance both. And I had way expectations, but I would rant to myself about myself. And a friend of mine said, my gosh, what are you thinking in your brain? And I told her, and then she said, you'd never talk to anyone else that way. And it's like, no, I would definitely not. And she said, you need to change how do you talk to yourself, like you talk to your patients and stuff. And so I started slowing down and revamping how I talk to myself. And I gave much more compassion to other people than to myself. But it really helped that she told me that. Had not, my self-awareness was really bad, and I did not realize at that time how much that was and how much I expected of myself that was not realistic, and how I'd never say that to other people. So that helped. And then also asking for help. I was brought up in a family where you're independent, you pull yourself up by your own bootstraps, and we're in Texas and you just do your own thing. And to ask for help was considered a weakness in my family of origin. And it's like, oh my gosh, I need to ask for help. And if I did, I was just shocked that they could do it without me feeling guilty.
Barbara, you said so many good things. I just want to underscore several of them. So first of all, you talked about really changing what you tell yourself about yourself. And us psychotherapists know that that comes under the category of what's called cognitive behavioral therapy, which, by the way, we're going to get to in a couple of slides. So you're beating me to the punch here, but that's okay. But how do you do that, right? If your friend says you're being way too hard on yourself, nobody else, you would never talk to anybody else the way you talk to yourself, and you realize, well, I'm kinder to other people than I am to myself, and then so how do you be kinder to yourself? How do you let yourself down? Let yourself off the hook a little bit. What did you do to do that?
I just basically tried to think whenever I'd go into that mode, I'd try and think, okay, calm down, take a deep breath, slow down and take a timeout. I would pet the dog to get my cortisol, or I'd ask for a hug from a friend or something and calm myself down. And then I'd try and talk. And it's just trying to be aware of how I was doing and almost stopping myself, which was hard for me because I get on a road and then I go 90 miles per hour in my brain. So, but if I could stop and take a pause and refresh myself, I did better. And years ago, when I was a nurse, I had someone take care of their mother and their brother, and she never would take care of herself. And later on, she ended up having a stroke and she had to go to a nursing home before her mother or her brother did. And that really taught me a big lesson about self-care.
Okay. I mean, Barbara, again, really wonderful insights that you're offering. So I'm going to underscore a couple of things you said. You slowed it down. That sometimes our automatic reaction, our fastest reaction, first reaction, however you want to term it, that's not always our kindest reaction, right? Especially if we're in the habit of being very, very self-critical and having lots of self-doubts. So you had to slow it down and say, whoa, 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 let's not rush to judgment about myself here. Let's take it easy. Let me think this through. Let me pet the dog, take the deep breath, and let me really approach myself as well as the situation with a little bit more self-reflection and a little bit more kindness. Barbara, that's really, really good advice. So I'm going to just jump ahead to the slide in which we talk about this, and we can backtrack in a moment to a different method. But what we say to ourselves about ourselves is often inaccurate, right? What I sometimes say to clients is, don't believe everything you say to yourself. And so I have two examples here, and I'm going to tell you that both of them I have fallen prey to in the past. So one is, if my mom falls, then it will be all my fault, right? So, my mom, when she had vascular dementia, was somebody who was supposed to use a walker all the time. And because she had very, very poor balance, and she fell. And when she fell, she broke bones, and she went up in the hospital several times. But every time she fell, whether I was in the room or not, I blame myself that somehow I couldn't keep my mom in a wheelchair. I couldn't keep her, I couldn't keep her upright. When she fell, sometimes it was I would say, not on my watch. I didn't want anything bad to happen to her on my watch. So I would blame myself. And here's another example. If I forget to pick up my husband's medications, then it must mean I'm a bad wife. So I changed this a little bit, but I could have said, if I forget to pick up my mom's medications, then it must mean I'm a bad son. I'm a little bit more accurate here. But caregivers often have lots of things on their minds, and they don't always remember everything that they're supposed to do. And remembering to go pick up medications is not, is sometimes pretty low down on the priority list. And then to kind of blame oneself, to kick oneself as if, you've done something terrible, that doesn't help you. That makes you feel worse. It doesn't add to your confidence. It takes away from your confidence. And so what I would say is that these two sentences here, if my mom falls, it'll be all my fault. And if I forget to pick up my husband's medications, then it must mean I'm a bad wife. Both of them are not accurate. Yet people do believe these kinds of things. So what we call things that are inaccurate like this, we call them in what's called cognitive behavior therapy, and call them distortions. And what we want to do, as Barbara was just describing, is to correct some of those distortions, and to instead adopt more realistic thoughts. And more realistic thoughts are, generally speaking, ones that are less self-critical and gives us some credit for doing our best. Evelyn, I know you're a psychotherapist also. Does this fit in with how you think about this?
I think these are great examples, and I will remember the time when you were on one of these calls talking to us, and you said you would tell your mom to use the walker, and she would say, "You're not my boss." And I thought that was
laughing, but it wasn't so funny at the time.
I know, and it's a beautiful thing. I mean, it's like what happens, because just because you want to protect them and you want them to be safe doesn't mean you can. That they still have a mind of their own and behavior of their own. So I think, yeah, these are really good.
Yes, I mean, what you're putting me in mind of is serenity prayer, accepting the things we cannot change, which I didn't really ever like very much. But I also saw was very important. But a lot of times we make up our mind in our own mind that nothing bad, we're not going to let anything bad happen, never going to forget anything, and the person we're caring for is always going to get the doctor's appointment at the same time, when they're supposed to be there on time, that they're always going to be happy, that they're never going to have a bad night, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We create these extra unrealistic obligations upon ourselves, and then if those things aren't achieved, we beat ourselves up. So I think we have to be kinder, as Barbara was saying. Minerva says, try telling your mom not to get out of the hospital bed without help, even though she thinks she's fine now. And I think that sounds good, Minerva, but you didn't know my mom, right? My mom was pretty pig-headed. She was going to get up out of that hospital bed no matter what. Even if I didn't, even if she, it didn't matter whether she thought she was fine. She wasn't going to allow me to tell her what to do, and she was going to do it just to demonstrate that I wasn't her boss. So, anyway, analyzing thoughts is doing more. I think Barbara actually explained it better than I did. Being aware of what we're saying to ourselves about ourselves is really important in terms of helping overcome self-doubts. Sometimes in Barbara's case, it takes someone else saying to us, "You're really being unkind to yourself." And for us to kind of stop and think, let me actually reflect upon what it is that I'm actually saying to myself. Maybe I am being unkind to myself, and why would I do that? Any other thoughts about this particular method of overcoming self-doubt? Taking a look at what we say to ourselves about ourselves. Does this make sense, or does this sound, like psychobabble?
It makes sense. And the other thing is just learning to forgive yourself, because sometimes you do things and you go like, I could have done a better job. If you can forgive that, you can forgive other people and things that happen, in life. And I think that's a really important thing to do too.
Oh, absolutely. So what I'm going to say is, because, most of the folks are all silent on this call, immediately what I'm saying to myself is, well, they must not be very happy with what I'm saying, or they must be very bored with what I'm saying. And so then I'm jumping to, if I could say, if people on the call are not participating very much, then it must mean I'm a boring speaker. Right? So that will be that's going to be the thought I'm going to be left with, unless I can analyze my thoughts and then try to be kinder to myself.
That's a good example.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Let's go back here. So one of the things that that we talked about before is one of the reasons for self-doubt is that people have had a history of maybe failing in the past. And because they've had past failure, they have a lack of confidence now. Well, because they've had past trauma, they feel that they just don't feel capable. They feel ashamed. They feel helpless. And so what becomes really important then is, number one, and I'm going to jump down to the bottom bullet here, is we're not captive to our past. Our past influences us. Our past does not define us. That's really important. So we don't want to make believe the past doesn't exist, because we all have complex histories, and those histories have taught us things, and not all bad things, but many, many good things. And if they've given us a certain way of looking at the world and looking at ourselves, those are not bad things, but they don't dictate exactly how we're going to think of ourselves today in the present. We can define ourselves as a caregiver as the different person than the person who may have failed in the past. And this requires an intentional effort. We have to actually say that things in the past didn't go so well, but that doesn't mean that things now are not going to go so well. It means that I learned things that maybe make me more resilient. There's that old, and I'm forgetting the name of the pop singer, excuse me, it'll come to me in a moment, but what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. If somebody knows the name of that pop singer, please put it in the chat. It's going to just gnaw at me that I don't remember. But I mean, to really be able to, okay, I see some kind souls put it in there. Kelly Clarkson, thank you so much, Minerva. Of course. And the idea that that if you've had bad things happen, it doesn't mean that you don't learn from them. You do learn from them. Oh, and thank you, Laura. I can see you aren't boring. I'm not boring. I'm just forgetful, is what you're saying, Laura. I get it. So, anyway, but we have to really appreciate our experience, and even our experience of failure. I mean, one of the kind of truisms of business is that if you failed at a business venture, it doesn't mean you never try another business venture again. If anything, it means you learn so much through failure. You're now better equipped to succeed the second time, or the third time, or the fourth time. And we have to believe that we are capable of learning, capable of changing, and becoming more resilient with time. So this is a way of maybe separating past from present is not quite accurate, but of learning from the past, but not being captive to it. That I think is probably would have been a better heading for this slide. Any thoughts about this idea of regarding our past as is not determining who we are, though it does influence who we are?
Buddy, we'd love to hear from you. It's just a quiet group today, Barry.
I get it.
It's not
fine.
boring.
It's fine. There's I won't take it so personally, or as you say, I'll forgive myself later for being boring. So, all right, let me go on to the last thought here about ways of overcoming self-doubt. And that's dealing with others' criticism. Because as we mentioned, others' criticism make our self-doubts worse. They reinforce our self-doubts. They may really amplify our self-doubts. And so there's a concept in psychology, like it's a really old concept that goes back like 60, 70 years, which I always found to be a helpful concept. And this idea of quote unquote locus of control. What helps us define who we are? Is it what we feel inside of ourselves, or what other people think of ourselves? So when internal locus of control would be How we feel about ourselves is based on what we think about ourselves. I don't care what others think about me. I don't care if they think I'm not doing a good job caregiving. I know my situation. They don't know my situation. I get up every day. I do this work. I know I'm doing a good job. I don't need their validation. I don't need their affirmation. I'm good, right? That's an internal locus of control. That's what I would hope every caregiver could come to. A person who has an internal locus of control is less prone to self-doubts. They may still have some, but they're not going to be swayed by others' opinions so much. The external locus of control, on the other hand, is how we feel about ourselves is based on what others think. Gee, my brother thinks I'm not doing such a good job with my mom. I don't know what to do. I mean, maybe I'm screwing this up. My sister thinks I'm spending too much money. Maybe I'm not managing the money well. Maybe, or I, my father thinks I should be doing more for my wife, or whatever it is. There are others that have opinions that somehow have great influence on how we're feeling about ourselves. And that's makes it very difficult for us. It's very difficult when the care receiver blames us or criticizes us, or when others blame or criticize us, instead of trusting in our own judgment. And ultimately, we're the ones who do the work. We're the ones who are there. We're the ones who understand the situation better, far better than other people, especially the people who live in the other, three states away, who think that they know best. They don't know best. We have to believe that we know best. And then we have to judge ourselves accordingly, as doing the best we can under the circumstances that we understand. So thoughts about this? This is one of these easier said than done things, because it's not so easy to just put others' criticism aside, especially when we're hearing it from people who we love, people who we respect. But we gotta believe in ourselves. We have to believe that we are doing the best under the circumstances, and that we are, even if we're not perfect, we're darn good. So Patricia, you're looking very quizzical, and I know I'm putting you on the spot, and it's an awful thing. It's so mean of me to do this to you. Could you share? Go right ahead. Tell us, what do you think about dealing with others' criticism?
I think it's important to take advantage of other people's views, in the sense of the things that I look at as important are not going to be the things that someone else will see. But if I listen, and if there's a grain of truth that I can act on, then that will improve the life of myself and my loved one. But then with that is okay, I've made this decision, I'm on this path, and then I breathe and I go outside and I look at the sunshine and feel it and the blue sky, and then I'm ready to get back on the same road that I've been on, which is just trying to do the best we can.
Really well said. Very well said. I'm so glad I put you on the spot. Because, I mean, what you're actually pointing out is that sometimes people can, as Barbara said earlier, people can show us things that it's hard for us to see ourselves.
Yes.
But we need to, you said something, a very interesting phrase, a really good phrase. If there's a grain of truth in what they say, you have to consider it. But you don't buy everything they say just outright. It's like, oh my Lord, my brother thinks this, therefore it must be true. We have to weigh it. We have to reflect upon it, and then decide, is there a grain of truth there that I really need to take to heart? Really well said. Go ahead, Barbara.
I noticed that with people, when I used to do cardiac home health and hospice, the families that lived sometimes the farthest would try and impose their solutions to everything. I think it wasn't so much a criticism. I think their intention was helpful, maybe, but the reason why they were doing it and becoming so possessed with trying to solve different problems was because they felt out of the circle and they didn't feel as helpful as the one that was there, but the one that was there knew the situation the most. And sometimes other people criticized it, I think, so they felt more control or more contributing, and they ended up alienating the person who's a caregiver.
Absolutely. I mean, I think long distance caregivers sometimes try to make up in assertiveness what they lack in proximity. Maybe they feel guilty that they're so far away, but they can say things and actually insist upon things from afar in trying to be helpful, which are not helpful. And as you point out, Barbara, they can alienate themselves from the caregiver who's on the front line. So that's quite common. That's not unusual at all. And sometimes very often I counsel long distance caregivers about ways in which they actually can be helpful, rather than deciding to tell the primary caregiver how to do things from 3 states away. So, but I think that's really well said. So we have to take into account that people may be well-meaning, but they don't always know what's best, and they may not have enough information to know what's best. We know better, but as Patricia says, we have to seek that grain of truth to see if in fact there may be something that they're offering which we can benefit from. So that's really, I think those are great ideas. So let me, is there anything else that we should do with, I'm going to skip that. Let me actually go to this last slide because I just see what time it is. So there is a whole branch of psychology known as positive psychology. It's been around, I'm going to say 30 or 40 years. And if you put in positive psychology in Google, you'll get all kinds of interesting information. But it's basically, it's research that has found that when people are optimistic about themselves, excuse me, let me read this. When they're optimistic about themselves and the world, that they tend to be happier. And then when people, on the other hand, people are pessimistic, and people who are pessimistic are also often the people who are self-doubters. I don't know. I'm not sure I can do this. I'm not sure I'm good enough for this. I'm not sure I know what to do. I'm not sure I'm adequate. That constant talk that we give ourselves, which is very pessimistic and negative talk, those folks are actually more prone to depression and anxiety. But we don't want to be so optimistic that we're unrealistic. We don't want to say, oh, this will be no problem at all. I'll be the best caregiver that's ever lived, because that's ridiculous. So we want to be cautiously optimistic. And that is, we want to go into this thinking, okay, I'll be able to handle this with time. I'll figure it out and I'll do my best, and I'm sure I'll do a good job. That's what cautious optimism sounds like. There's a famous social psychologist by the name of Carol Dweck who came up with this idea of the growth mindset. And the growth mindset, I think, fits in very well with positive psychology. And that's the belief that if you focus on something like caregiving, if you work hard at it, and you're going to underscore this, are open to learning, then you can improve yourself as a caregiver. I would hope that most of us have had that experience, that if there was something about caregiving that we didn't know at the beginning, and we had more experience, and maybe as Evelyn points out, we had more training, then we actually got better at it. And after a while, we got pretty proficient, and even maybe took some pride in whatever we were doing. So there are people who believe that they can learn and grow and into a new position. And then there are people who have that fixed mindset, and that the belief that there's not much they can do to improve their abilities. That if they were inadequate coming in as a caregiver at the beginning, they're always going to be an inadequate caregiver. Maybe they always think that they're an inadequate person, and therefore they must necessarily then be an inadequate caregiver. Okay. I see that Minerva has launched the session survey, and that is my cue to now wrap up here. And I'm going to turn this back to Evelyn. But I thank you all. I see one last comment, and Christine says, thank you. The information is very much needed. I'm going to Google positive psychology. And again, I want to read what Laura said above that, just because I think it's worth repeating. You see, you aren't boring. So I appreciate both those. All right, even when I'm turning it back to you.
Barry, thank you so much. You are not boring. Sometimes, we get a lot of input and sometimes we don't. And I think it depends a lot on, the personalities of people who are participants, as you know. Some of us are less willing to put ourselves out there than others. But when you do, I have to tell you, nobody can help a caregiver like another caregiver. So never hesitate to participate in our sessions because we love to have that. And I am going to tell you a couple of final things. One, if you got the number or the Zoom code for this training from someone else rather than registering, you won't get the resources, the slides that Barry has prepared so nicely. And so what we'd really like for you to do is to call our customer service, the lovely Minerva, the incredible Minerva, at 866-390-6491. That's 866-390-6491. And then what happens is you'll not only get the slides from this show, but you will get a monthly calendar. And you can register directly off that monthly calendar for sessions that you find interesting. And I'd like to tell you about a few of our upcoming sessions too. There's many have been scheduled, and there's a series. We've got a series that will include caregivers in the care team, a series for healthcare workers by Elliot Montgomery Sklar and Lucy Barilak. And they're going to be doing Wednesday the 16th and Wednesday the 23rd and Wednesday the 30th with different topics that, really attend to, what their series is talking about. How to include caregivers in the care team. And then let's see, next Thursday, I made a promise how to cope with the guilt and heartbreak when hard choices need to be made. It's going to be an interesting one. And then the following Monday, October 21st, Ombudsman, neutral advocates helping family caregivers navigate long-term care. And it's once we make that decision for long-term care, it's really important to know how to go on from there. So that's going to be great. Tuesday, October 22nd is Mastering Mindful Self-Care. Hey, that's what we were talking about today. And you better watch that one, Barry. And then at the end of the month, we're going to have one in Spanish, and it's understanding what is an evaluation for capacity. And, capacity is sort of loosely translated when you can sign for something or you're considered not mentally savvy enough to sign for something. So we hope that you'll join all of those. I want to thank you, Barry, so much because we know how hard you work to put these shows together for us and to try to tickle those participants to give some feedback and to join with us on this. And I really appreciate your sense of humor in doing that. And I want to thank all of the participants who, whether you spoke or not, we're so happy you were with us. And we know, we hope to hear from you in the future. We hope you join us in the future. I'd also like to thank the WellMed Charitable Foundation, who does so much for caregivers and talking about how to get training. You can go to their SOS centers. You can go to the clinics that they have, and ask if you happen to be part of their health plan. They really do a good job at managing chronic care and helping caregivers support those who need it. So with that, I just want to thank you all, and I am going to close the recording and hope that we see you next time. Hear from you next time. Bye, Barry. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye. See you all.
Okay.